Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's an immense pleasure to be with you this afternoon and to be virtually with those who are with us virtually. I have to say, this is a bit of a shock for me to find myself in this room, because the last time I was here was in early June 1978, when I was doing my history finals. And I have not been back in this room since. And you can imagine me sitting at a little desk somewhere about halfway up this room, surrounded by lots of other little desks, separated, of course, so you couldn't cheat, and by looking at somebody else's work, and sitting here for 3 hours over a week's period, morning and afternoon, doing my history finals. And it did make me think when I was here this afternoon about this, because, of course, whilst I wouldn't wish to make a great claim as a student to either of these things, we were supposed, when we were here and doing our exams and indeed studying, we were supposed to have some intellectual rigor. And that, of course, is the reverse of romanticized, vapid utterances. Now, when we look at the context that we are now in respect of both our relationship with Europe and also our attitude to the European Convention on Human Rights, which I am delighted to say, as a movement, we have decided to take up, we are faced, I'm afraid, by absolutely vapid, irrelevant utterances from those who wish or try to argue either that we should leave the European Convention on Human Rights, or, of course, those who come along and say that, in fact, leaving the European Union was in some way a good idea. So I thought for the 15 minutes I've got this afternoon, it might just be worth looking at those two issues specifically, because I'm conscious that Caroline, my wonderful co-president, in her opening speech, touched on some other things about what the movement was doing. But I thought that for this afternoon, that might be quite a good place to go. So let's just start with the European Convention on Human Rights. I get not fed up, but slightly frustrated that on the whole, the arguments that one tends to hear about remaining center on some rather obvious facts that because every other European country apart from Belarus and Russia are signed up, there would be serious adverse political consequences to going. One of them, of course, is that our trade and cooperation agreement with the European Union would be in question and its security angle would undoubtedly disappear into the bin. The second one is that the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is untenable without shared adherence to the ECHR. And some of the casuistical attempts by certain lawyers to argue that you can have the benefits of the convention whilst not being a member of it are simply do not stack up. But that, for me, is only about a quarter of the argument, because the reality is that the European Convention on Human Rights, created largely by UK lawyers in the late 1940s, is a monument to shared values which we wish to see extended across the European continent. And as a result of signing up, we ensured happened and had been transformational, particularly in relation to Eastern European countries coming in after they had escaped from communism, and indeed has been enormously beneficial for us in terms of a timely reminder on the state, often without there even being the need for litigation, that rights are fundamental. Things as basic as not separating an elderly couples in different care homes, a direct result of incorporation and the human rights. And then linked to that is the fact that the suggestion that leaving the convention is somehow going to solve certain problems is manifestly absurd. You can make compelling arguments if you wish, and doubtless in this hall today there will be people with different viewpoints. You can make different arguments about whether we have an immigration or illegal migration crisis or not. But one thing I am absolutely sure about is that leaving the European Convention on Human Rights is utterly peripheral to the question of whether you can remove failed asylum seekers or, for that matter, deport prisoners at the end of their sentences. For the most part, politicians ought to know, and if they don't, they're simply not doing their homework, that the basic reason, and most basic, is that the countries, likely countries of origin, will not take those people back. So yet again in this country, just as we did 10 years ago, we appear to be embarking on a campaign where you hear quite a lot of sotto voce, almost half acceptance from mainstream political parties that ought to know better, that somehow this is a panacea to which we should resort, when the evidence is overwhelming that it is going to do absolutely no practical good at all and an immense amount of damage. That is the irrationality against which we have to fight. Now, the second thing is, of course, the EU and our future relationship with it. Back 4 weeks ago, I went to Luxembourg to deliver the Winston Churchill Memorial Lecture. And I chose, perhaps slightly tongue-in-cheek, the title, Friends with Benefits or Remarriage, What is the United Kingdom's Future Relationship with the EU? Those of you who want to read it can find it on a website, I think, from the British Luxembourg Society. But one thing it brought home to me, because I had to go off and do a little bit of homework, was a bit of research on where we are in relation to our benefits that we might enjoy with the EU or have lost as a result of leaving it. I was struck that back on the 1st of May this year, in a ministerial question time in the Commons, Douglas Alexander, the junior trade minister, stated in reply to a question about the then impending UK-EU summit, he said this: "We are consciously pursuing a trade-based agenda based on data, not post-imperial delusion, and regrettably the data is pretty devastating in terms of the damage done by the way that Brexit was implemented by our predecessors." But this statement appeared to so trouble the Prime Minister's office that it felt necessary to respond by putting out the delightfully opaque utterance, "We are proud of our nation's history, but we are also a country that looks forward." Now, it really is time to get real. Douglas Alexander, in fairness to him, was getting real. The UK economy, in that period where we were under the thrall of the European Union from 1973 to 2016, grew by 103%, outperforming Germany 99%, France 74%, even the United States of America 97%. The growth annually of 2.1% when we were members was higher than the growth between 1872 and 1914, 0.9% as against 2.1 when we were living our life of imperial splendor. Trade increased 21% in the first 15 years, raising real income for every person in this country by 10%. And these are very well established statistics, and I'm afraid they are also matched by the fact that since we have left, our economy has essentially been flatlining. And while some of that is not due to leaving the European Union, a lot of it is, and the evidence is overwhelming that compared to our main European partners, we are going to continue to have immense difficulty raising our GDP and our national wealth until such time as we see sense and start to return to a closer trading relationship. I did a little bit more statistical analysis and noted to my, I would say, amusement, that we have just done, of course, a trade deal with Australia. In 2024, our exports of goods and services to Australia, a country of 26 million people, was 16 billion per annum. Our exports in the same period to Luxembourg in trade, goods and services, population 670,000, was 13.2 billion. And that is the reality of the extent of the damage that we have done to ourselves. And so when we look at our mission as a movement, it's perfectly plain that the ammunition we've now got is immense in terms of going out and pointing to reality, which is by cutting ourselves off from our closest trading partners, we have lost a series of advantages that cannot be replicated elsewhere. And the current government, for all my gentle criticisms of some aspects of it, I think knows this very well. And even my former party, I don't think they're quite so goofy that some of them haven't cottoned on to what has happened. So we have an opportunity. The question is, for us, how can we best promote it? How can we best put out a positive message? And dare I say it to all of you, and perhaps I can say it to all of you here, how can we romanticize it a little bit? Because it's not just about economics. It's not just even about pollution of our watercourses. It's not just about dealing with climate change. It is also about whether you feel inspired or not in trying to work together with other people who share your values, and therefore, as a consequence, you want to work with them, particularly because they are your neighbours. And I think when it comes to that, there is an awful lot more that we can do. Because we are, this year, the 80th anniversary, of course, of the end of the Second World War. But what I think it's easy to forget is that the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War actually marks the beginning of one of the most extraordinary four-year periods in European history, when the United Kingdom, taking the lead, actually started to promote what led to the creation of this movement, Council of Europe, and ultimately the EU itself. Indeed, as I noted when I went to do the Luxembourg lecture, Churchill went to Luxembourg in June 1946. Of course, he was being feted everywhere as he went around Europe, but it was a great build-up to that Hague conference in 1948, when he started to articulate what I think are higher reasons why that cooperation is needed. Today, we need that cooperation. We're living in a dangerous world, and it's pretty obvious. The United States, admittedly, Trump is astonishing, but I don't think there's any reason to suppose that Trump's disappearance is going to lead back to a status quo ante, when it has been pretty clear for a long time that the United States' global interests and those of Europe are divergent. We are facing in Ukraine a continuing and real challenge and risk of war, which frankly, we are in danger of simply burying our heads in the sand and hoping it will go away just by chucking a bit of money at it. And the evidence is pretty overwhelming it won't. And if Putin wins, then the security of our entire continent is in question. That requires change on all sides. The European Union has its own protectionism, and of course, now that we are out of it, it can be quite difficult to persuade our European Union partners not to look at their narrow self-interest, just as I'm afraid half the time we do the same with ours. So, for example, with the new security cooperation agreements, the United Kingdom is currently not a participant, essentially because France is being protectionist of its defence industry and is only prepared to allow us a segment which is advantageous to them, and not allowing a level playing field in which our own defence industry, which is vital for Europe, can play a full role. Those are the barriers that need to be broken down. Now, as well as being your co-president, I'm also, to my great pleasure, a member of the Council of Administration of the Institut Jean Monnet. And Monnet was a great man because although he's regarded usually as being the founder of Europe, he was in fact long before that the founder of knocking heads together to tell people to stop to drop their narrow self-interest and cooperate for the common good. As he said so rightly, men only act in a state of necessity and only recognize necessity in a situation of crisis. But that crisis is on us collectively, and not just here, but as much in France or Germany or Italy or any of the other countries of our continent. And that is a crisis that we have to face up to together. Back at that 1948 Hague conference, Churchill, who actually understood these issues, even if at times some of his politics can be questioned, he said this: "We shall only save ourselves from the perils which draw near by letting national rancours and revenges die, by progressively effacing frontiers and barriers which aggravate and congeal our divisions, and by rejoining together in that glorious treasure of literature, of romance, of ethics, of thought and toleration belonging to all, which is the true inheritance of Europe, the expression of its genius and honour." And that, it seems to me, is what this movement is all about. The practical steps that we take are taken, even if we come together from different ends of the political spectrum, because of that. Because we know in our hearts, but also rationally, that it is the only sane way forward for the countries of the size and status that make up Europe. Some smaller countries understood it a long time ago, Luxembourg particularly, and have benefited from it accordingly. The lesson here seems to me to be taking a bit longer to get through. But that's not a reason why we shouldn't continue with our campaign. I'm confident that if we keep in mind those principles, and above all, exclude no one who shares them, then we have the capacity in the next 3 years to make a really profound impact, to make sure that these idiotic ideas on the European Convention of Human Rights are batted away in the way they deserve, and to make sure that we progress yet again in building a closer relationship, which I am confident will eventually take us back into the EU, but exactly in what form, that remains to be seen. Thank you so much for coming here today. Thank you for all the work you do on the ground. My thanks also to all those who do so much hard work to make this movement operate properly. And I look forward to the coming 12 months as your co-president and to taking these arguments forward. Thank you very much.